great. So look, I think probably it's 6:30. Let's kind of just start, and then more people are going to join in. I've just got to bear in mind that I'm driving this, and therefore have to keep an eye on people arriving into the room so I can let them in. I have to sort of positively bring people in rather than just them joining themselves. And I may get sort of confused when I'm trying to say something and let them in at the same time. But hopefully Amanda will join us to help with that. Welcome everybody. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. It's really great to have you guys listening, but also we've got a handful of really lovely people who are here to talk through some of these topics. And we're going to be talking about farming techniques. And one of the reasons is I am scratching my head thinking, are we doing things the right way at Domaine of the Bee? Are there things we should be thinking about doing differently? And I'm partly here to get some free consultancy advice from my 3 winemaking friends to ask them a little bit about. Here's Amanda, she's just arrived. Amanda, we've got 23 people in so far. If you see people arriving and if you could accept them, that would be great. And actually, we should be open and start drinking it. So, yeah, I've been thinking about, we farm at Domaine of the Bee. We're not organic. We're not organic. We're not biodynamic. We are conventional, but we're as minimal input as possible. And I'm scratching my head thinking that how, if we were to make a step to become organic, what are the costs? And we're going to talk about some of those issues here, and I'm hopefully going to inform myself better with.
I think we can take them off there, and I'll put them up in there. We can put them.
So the other point of this really is apart from sort of informing everybody who's listening in, and I can see quite a mix of people, a few folk in the wine trade who may know a little bit already, a lot of people who are wine club members. It's really to have a chance to share a glass and just bone up and learn a little bit about a topic we might know not a huge amount about. So we're going to be covering the kind of 4 different ways of farming. So if we say conventional, I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. Conventional, organic, biodynamic, and then a category which is becoming more and more important nowadays is sustainable. And what does sustainable really mean? And hopefully we can cover those things while we talk to our guests. What I'm planning to do at the beginning is just give you maybe 10 minutes on what those 4 categories mean, what they're about. And then we're going to introduce the guests who we've got here. Now, I'm going to tell you who they are now. First of all, we've got Katie Jones with us. Katie's waving now. Katie and her husband, Jean-Marc. They're down there in Fitou, in the south of France. Katie's originally from Aspie de la Zouche, which is is that near Leicestershire? Somewhere around there, Katie?
Yeah, it's in the centre of Leicestershire. Actually.
Centre of Leicestershire, fantastic. And you moved out to France, what, 20 something years ago?
25 years ago.
I knew Katie a while back. She was the export director of the Montoche Co-op, and I bought a lot of wine from her when I was working at Safeway and then Sainsbury's. So she's been out there a long time and has got a lot of interesting things to say. We've also got Nigel Greening. Now, Nigel is the boss of Felton Road in central Otago.
Is he there?
Nigel's there.
Yay! Hi, Nigel.
We went down to see him last February, in fact. We had a lovely holiday in New Zealand and spent a bit of time with Nigel, and he's a lovely guy and will tell us a little bit about what's going on right now in Otago and New Zealand generally, because they're on lockdown and trying to harvest at the same time. And then we're going to talk to Nick Wenman. Nick, do you want to wave so everyone can see you? Some of you may not be able to see everyone on the same screen, but we've got the gallery view so we can see everybody together, which is great. Actually, we can't because there's 34 people here now.
Yeah,
so,
2 screens.
Yeah, we have to switch between 2 screens to see everybody. But Nick is the owner and leading light of Albury Vineyard, which is in the Surrey Hills of England, not the Surrey Hills near Sydney in Australia. And he is one of the people crazy enough to start thinking about trying to farm biodynamically in one of the wettest, most difficult countries to do that in the world. So Nick's going to tell us a little bit about biodynamic farming in a while. So I'm just going to start, as I said, I'm going to talk to you for about 10 minutes, maybe a bit longer if I get carried away, just about where do these farming techniques come from? If we think our way back to about 100 years ago, yes, Amanda's going to be opening this bottle while I talk. I'll get the corkscrew.
Thank you. Sorry, we've just got to get our priorities.
We haven't really, you know, we're meant to be drinking already, but we haven't really started. Think back 100 years, farming was essentially pretty much organic. There wasn't a lot of chemicals used in those days. And what really happened was that the Green Revolution happened in the kind of 30s. Fertilizer had been invented in the late 20th century, but the late 19th century, but hadn't really been commercialized because they couldn't make it on a big scale. During the First War, one of the people who was involved in actually making gases for killing people in the trenches on the German side actually came across the way of making nitrogen fertilizers and was able to ramp it up and make it really very cheaply. And then it became something that everybody started using, because if you use nitrogen-based fertilizers, suddenly your yield of whatever you're growing can go up enormously. The vegetative growth becomes bigger, the photosynthetic power becomes bigger, you can ripen and grow much more crop. So people started doing that. And so really after the Second War is when really that kind of took off, and everyone's farming yields went up enormously. Now that presented a problem because you've got these fast growing, high yielding plants.
I won't admit.
I don't know.
I won't admit Alice for some reason. Anyway, carry on, Dolly. I'll do it. Don't worry.
Yeah, so you've got these new plants being boosted by this nitrogen fertilizer, growing really quickly. The trouble is you also get the weeds growing really quickly. And you also get plants that become a little bit more susceptible to various diseases. And so the chemical companies who provided the fertilizer then came along and said, well, we can sell you a fungicide. We can sell you a herbicide to kill the weed growth. And so the farmers who boosted their crops with the nitrogen fertilizers bought these two other types of chemical, and effectively conventional farming became very reliant on the use of chemicals. And it was really a few people who held back, who were kind of organic pioneers in the 20s, and again sort of growing more in the 40s, who started trying to carry on farming entirely without chemicals. And the idea of organic is that you can't use anything that is synthetic. You can use chemicals as long as they've been mined out of the earth. So sulfur and copper sulfate and things like that can be used. Doesn't mean they're not chemicals. So one of the things we'll talk about in a minute, those are still chemicals, but they happen to be mined rather than manufactured, and therefore they're okay for use in organic. So organic farming was restricted to using things that were mined from the earth and not using any of the three synthetic chemicals. And then there's a class of organic or super organic, which is called biodynamic, as pioneered by a slightly occultist guy called Rudolf Steiner in Germany in the 20s. And some of his theories are quite odd. I'm sure some of you around the Zoom conference know a little bit more about it than others, but essentially he applied two kind of classes of things to organic farming. One was kind of homeopathy, by using very, very small quantities of teas and tisanes that he made. He would treat his plants, and he was mostly working not with vines, but with vegetables and things in Germany for growing fruit and veg. He developed a whole series of thoughts about how best to farm using both homeopathy and astrology. So he did a lot of things based on the phases of the moon, and he recommended particular times of the day, times of the season to do certain functions. And so biodynamics arose out of that. And so by the 70s, 80s, organics and biodynamics started to pick up quite a bit of interest because people could see the damage being done by conventional. And it's probably fair to say nowadays that among wine growing, very particularly biodynamic is highly, highly respected because some of the very best producers in the world are growing grapes biodynamically. Whether it's the techniques, whether it's the homeopathy and the astrology that really have the effect, or it's the close attention and the obsessive observation and treatment when, with something when necessary, that actually has the effect, we don't know. But some of the best wines nowadays are made biodynamically. Last of all, in this long diatribe, and I hope I haven't gone on too long, actually it was only 10 minutes long, so I'm not doing too badly. We now are sort of grappling with this concept of sustainability. Now, the way I sort of described conventional farming doesn't sound very appetizing, so blanket bombing everything with a massive quantity of weed killer, pesticide and fertilizer to create high crops of very perhaps unhealthy plants doesn't sound very appetizing. In truth, with most wine production in lots of parts of the world, it's not nearly so intensive. Some parts of the world, particularly Chile, where it's very dry, where we are in the south of France, you don't need to use a lot of produce to keep at bay a lot of the diseases. And so actually a lot of grape farming is really, really quite unintensive in its use of chemicals. Having said that, there are parts of the world, and Bordeaux is a good example. It's very wet in Bordeaux, and they do have a big problem with oidium and with mildew, and they do have to spray on a regular basis to keep that at bay in a cool, warmish, wet climate like Bordeaux. But quite a few producers do manage to limit the amount of chemicals they do use. But there's been a move towards trying to do things in as sustainable a way as possible. And one of the thoughts behind sustainability is that it's not just environmental. Sustainability is about the environment and about the people and who work within the company, and also the people who live and work around the environment, which is around the farm environment. So the concern for the people and the social welfare of those people is part of sustainability. And a third part, which is really important to all of these philosophies, is financial sustainability. You cannot keep farming if you're not making any money. And you're great to hear from some of our guests about how that works for them. There are higher costs involved in organic and biodynamic farming, but are there also higher rewards? Can you make more money from that? And is that part of the sustainability picture? So a lot of people around the world are now starting to put in place sustainability programs. Good example would be New Zealand, where up to 95% of all producers in New Zealand have signed up to a sustainability charter. Nigel will tell us about this. It's not a very high bar, but they have managed to get almost all producers signing up, and they are gradually raising the bar as to what you need to do to be sustainable. South Africa similarly has a sustainability program. Sonoma in the States has. A lot of people are starting to say we must make sure all our growers are doing things sustainably. And France has had a number of different sustainability charters, and has recently kind of gathered them together under an umbrella called HVE, HVE, which is high environmental value. And so it will be interesting to talk to Katie about that. So those are the kind of topics we're talking about. I just want to sort of share some of the stories I've heard. So I was lucky enough to go and visit Gérard Gobi in the Roussillon, who is one of the Roussillon's leading lights. And he was one of the first people to produce really top quality wine there. And he is not an old man. He's in his probably late 50s, maybe 60 by now. But he's been farming there for 40 years. And he at his dad's side, went around the vineyards and knew all about farming when he was a teenager. And one of the things that he says, his moment of realization was when they replanted a vineyard, I think around 40 years ago, the practice in those days was to ensure that there were no viruses or anything in the soil. If you wanted to replant immediately, in the old days, they'd let them lie fallow for 4 or 5 years before they replanted. But they wanted to replant straight away to get the crop and the benefit of having the land put to use. So in those days, they would seed into the ground, they'd plough in a chemical that would kill all the viruses. And so that's what his dad had been persuaded to do by the chemical companies. They said, this is what you should do, is apply this product, and then you can plant again in a few months' time. And he went the next day to the field, and he started counting the dead birds. And he realized how many of these birds were, I think he counted 200 on this small plot. And he thought, this isn't right. I can't carry on doing this kind of thing. Now, that sort of thing is not very common in conventional agriculture now. It's been banned, that sort of behavior. But you can see where that sort of the seed of the idea for Gérard came from. And he essentially then applied biodynamic practices, and then also worked out how, I wonder if we can't go above 35. No, we have.
Oh, yeah.
That's Harry and Alice Bott, who've just arrived. Sorry, we couldn't admit you before. So that was the moment that he sort of realized we have to do something differently. And he has now almost thrown away the biodynamic rule book, because he said biodynamics was invented in Germany for horticulture, and we're in Catalonia growing grapes, and there's very few things that really make sense. So he's invented an entirely new set of his own rules to be doing things officially biodynamically. He is certified. He does follow the strictures that are required, but he does a lot of things over and above that. So that's me talking a lot. I think it's time now to start having a chat to some of our very kind guests. And Katie, we're going to talk to first. What I've asked Katie to do is just give us a few minutes about her own vineyard, how she started and how they farm, and then also why she's decided reasonably recently to convert all of their production to organic. And she's going to show us a few photographs and just talk a little bit. And so I'm going to hand the floor over to Katie. I would ask you all, if you've got questions, if you find at the bottom of the screen there's a chat function. If you click chat, you'll find up on the right hand side is a little panel, and you can start typing in questions that you can address to particular people, or just actually best address them to everyone so everyone can see the questions. And then I will choose particular questions to put to certain of our friendly producers. And then at the end, we'll have a kind of open mic free-for-all on the questions. But for now, Katie talk. Anyone else think of a question, type it in there, and we'll ask them to Katie when she's finished her piece. Also, last thing, if you want to switch to speaker view, then we'll be able to see Katie's pictures rather better, because she'll become the speaker and we'll see her photographs, which we won't be able to see very well if she's just one of the small panels. I need a drink. Katie, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Justin. And I've just learned loads from your little introduction there, so it's very instructive, and great to see you, Sam, as well. So this is Katie Jones here, and this is my husband Jean-Marc, and I've lived down here for 25 years, and we actually have two domains. We have a his and a her domain, so we have Domaine Jones on one side and Domaine Astruc on the other side, Domaine Jean-Marc. So we started 10 years ago with Domaine Jones, and Jean-Marc's was 5 years ago. And we have just quite recently taken that decision on my domain, on Domaine Jones, to go completely organic. So we are in what you call the conversion period. The conversion period lasts for 3 years. During those 3 years, you must abide to all of the organic regulations. You are audited as well on what products you're using and in the vineyard, so very strict controls even in the conversion period. So as far as my vines are concerned, that's where we are. Mine are only old vines, so old vineyards up to 110 years old. Whereas Jean-Marc, he is now absolutely certified 100% organic, and he has younger vines. So he has, again, together we have about 24 hectares. Jean-Marc will get a word in edgeways a bit later on. It's just that because of the time constraint, I'm doing it in English, and if there's any questions, we can then translate later on for Jean-Marc.
But I don't speak very well.
No, but he speaks fine. So basically, I wanted to just be really simple, because we like simple things at Domaine Jones. And it was just literally to show you some photos and to say why we have gone organic. So I'm just going to get some photos up here.
This morning.
So this was this morning. Okay, so I just really wanted to show you this photo. You may be thinking, oh, that grass looks lovely and green in the front. Isn't that lovely? What I want you to look at is that picture behind. I'd just like to say, this is not our vineyard, okay? Do not think this is our vineyard. This vineyard, Jean-Marc took the photo this morning. This is a vineyard that has been blanket weed killered to get rid of every single blade of grass that there is, and any competition to the vines. Why have they done that? It's basically to make sure that there's no competition for the water for the vines, and so that they get a higher yield. But it's, I mean, when you just look at it, you've got the lovely lush grass, which is actually our grass in our vineyard there, and next door to it you've got this vine which is pretty much, I mean, you can sort of call it pretty much dead, really. There's really not much happening in that vineyard. So that's what we're up to. And then I just wanted you to have a look at this one and compare it. And this, for me, visually, is to say why we have gone organic. So this is our vineyard, okay? This is one of our vineyards at Domaine Jones. It's 110-year-old vines. And you can see that we are ploughing. So rather than going in basically with the chemicals, basically Roundup weed killer, you can go in once a year almost. You can spray, blanket spray, kill everything, and then perhaps if you're unlucky, you have to go back in the summer, do a bit more spraying. Whereas here, with the ploughing, we were saying it's at least 5 times.
4 or 5, depends.
Yeah, 4 or 5 times a year that we have to go in with our little plough here, a shunya, and plough the soil. But we do it because we believe that just looking at it, those vines, in very simple terms, look a lot happier than the other vines. The soil looks aerated and healthy, and we're very convinced that we are helping to protect the environment compared to that last picture that we just saw. So in very visual terms, that was why we did it. And but yes, I know what you're going to say. No,
Pour se protéger aussi, parce que l'utilisation des produits chimiques.
Yeah, so we do it for a couple of reasons, but it's also to protect ourselves and to protect our workers. We have 2 workers who help with us in the vineyard, so we want to protect ourselves against chemicals too, and also protect our workers. We do it even though there are increased costs. We would say approximately 20-30% more. It costs 20 to 30% more, and that's compared to sustainable agriculture. And it's especially the workforce, because it's so labor intensive to actually work our vineyards organically. That's where the money goes. It's actually on the work in the vineyard. And I would say we've got 24 hectares if you take both of us, and we are very understaffed. We just have basically Jean-Marc and Michel, who's on the tractor there, doing the work. And so we are totally understaffed to be able to look after the vines organically, although we do it. But that's probably one of the reasons that we're not at the moment looking at biodynamic, because we just don't feel we have enough people to be able to do it. And then just one final photo, takes a while to come up. There we are. It's just the time delay here in Tuchon. And this is again another visual, very visual idea of why we do it. This is the time we took this photo yesterday, and it's actually the wild time in our vineyard. So we have wild herbs that grow in what we call the Garrigue landscape. I forgot to say where we are. We're between Narbonne, Perpignan and Carcassonne. So we're right down in the south of France. It is a great climate to be able to do organic farming because it's dry. It's very windy as well, which helps just to keep the grapes nice and healthy. But here as well, we have these wonderful wild herbs that grow in the Garrigue, and this is what we want to protect. We want to keep those wild herbs out in the vineyards. So let's get me back on the screen. There we go. So that was our quick presentation in a couple of words and visual pictures as to why we decided to take that step and to become organic.
Hey, thank you. That's really, really interesting and really nice to be able to see the visuals as well, to kind of really get a picture of it. I've got a couple of questions for you. So you've been in conversion for a couple of years now?
So we've been in conversion for...
C'est la troisième année pour toi.
Ça, c'est le troisième.
Oui.
So in three years conversion for Domaine Jones, we're going into the third year.
And do you have any stats or understanding of what that's done to your yield? So it's costing you more per hectare, but is it also providing you more fruit or less fruit or the same amount of fruit?
At Domaine Jones, we only have old vines. I think that's quite important to mention. So all of our vines are over 45 years old and up to 110. So we already had pretty low yields. So we haven't drastically reduced them. Mais est-ce que les rendements...
En fait, ça fait déjà plus de 20 ans qu'on utilise des engrais organiques. Et pour le moment, on n'a pas vu de baisse significative.
So although it's still quite hard to see a change in the yields because they're so low anyway, over the past 20 years, we've only used organic fertilizer on those vines. So as soon as they've come into our production, for the past 10 years, we've used organic fertilizer. So, but we haven't seen a significant drop in the yields.
Les baisses, je les ai eues entre le moment où j'étais en cave coopérative et après, oui, mais entre le moment où les vignes étaient en cave coopérative et là, il y avait eu des...
And what Jean-Marc is just saying, because we also have the experience of having vineyards in the cooperative. In our village, it's very much dominated by a wine cooperative. That first vineyard that I showed is an example. And I'm not going to name any names, but that is we are dominated by a cooperative. And in the cooperative system, what Jean-Marc was talking about just then was that even for 20 years on the vineyards that we had previously in the cooperative, which have now come out, we were using organic fertilizer in those vines. But to answer your question in a word, we haven't seen
a drop. And actually, Stephen Skelton, who's on the call with us, has just asked, can you just give us an idea of what the yields are? What are we talking about with the yields around in your part of the world?
So I can, for my Domaine, so Domaine Jones old vines, we are around about, for the reds, around about 25 hectolitres per hectare. And for the whites, we're anything between 15 and 20. And in Jean-Marc's vineyards, which are a bit younger, about 35.
Just to put that into context for everyone, that's very, very low. In most of France, Champagne, 60, 65, 70 hectolitres a hectare is common. 100 is possible if you push your yields. Bordeaux, 45 to 60 or 70 is pretty typical. So 15 to 25 is really low.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. So last question for you, Katie, is do you anticipate, or are you seeing the ability to sell your wine for higher prices because they're organic?
Est-ce qu'on voit qu'on peut les vendre plus cher?
I
don't like to put you off the organic movement. What I think is totally what Jean-Marc said is no. I think that you cannot. I think people expect the wines at a certain level to be at least organic anyway. But I think it does open new markets. So it helps to diversify the markets that you have, because some countries and some consumers in particular are looking specifically for organic wines and will look specifically for the logo. And it's not just saying, yes, well, we're thinking about it, we do it anyway, but we haven't bothered to get around to actually certifying ourselves. They actually want that logo, and they want the security of knowing that it is actually farmed organically.
And that is huge in Scandinavia and Germany. Kind of Northern European countries are really interested in organic in a way that in England they're probably not. I've got one more question for you, Katie, before we switch to Nigel Greening, which is, have you yet been able to taste the grapes and go, these taste much better than they did before?
I'll ask the oracle. Est-ce qu'on a, quand on a goûté des raisins, on a dit, wow, ça maintenant c'est mieux que ce qu'il y a. Wow.
On est allé progressivement et on n'a pas eu une rupture.
I think the answer again is going to be no, because we went step by step and progressively. We didn't suddenly change from conventional farming to organic. We went via the sustainability method, and we've always been as respectful as we can on the yields and on the quality of the grapes. And again, because where I'm concerned, it's old vines and low yields, the grapes have always tasted pretty delicious.
Par contre, on arrive à avoir maintenant au niveau du sol beaucoup de. Je pense que le sol est beaucoup mieux. Il y a des vers. Et je pense qu'il y a un équilibre au niveau de la plante qui est meilleur.
Yeah, where we do see it is in the vines and in the vineyard. And although that's difficult to communicate to the final consumer, unless, you know, like tonight, we can actually show you photos of what we mean. We see it in the soil. We see soils. If you use chemicals to get rid of like weed killers, the soil is compact, it's flat, it's dead. It's basically dead soil. Whereas now, like the pleasure we have when we go out and we walk around our vineyards, and it's just absolutely beautiful with all the wild herbs and the flowers, the olive trees. It's just amazing. So that for us would be where we find the most visual benefit, shall we say, rather than tasting the grapes, which were already really yummy.
Well, we'll ask Nigel about that in a minute. But I would reserve my own observations that when I went on a trip to the Rhone Valley, when I was quite interested in organics, and we were in vineyards that were organic next to ones that were conventional, I spent a long time picking up handfuls of soil and sniffing it. And the soil from the conventional vineyards just smelled like powder, mineral, sand, didn't really have any smell. The soil from the organic vineyards had this lovely, rich, complex sort of forest floor smell, where there was clearly things alive in the soil, and to my mind that was quite telling. But having said that, you haven't said much that's convinced me that economically it's really worth doing. So I'm still sort of scratching my head as to whether it's something that we should think about, and it may be something we will do in the future, but it needs to be thought through very carefully. Okay, thank you so much for that. That's really interesting. Nigel, I'm going to ask you, if you're happy to unmute yourself, just to give us, first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about New Zealand during COVID-19 and what's happening there, and the fact that your grapes are being picked as we speak? Give us paint a picture about that, if you could, for us.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, well, we're in an interesting time. Well, everybody's in an interesting time, I suppose, but we're somewhat pioneers at the moment in New Zealand. We moved to a very, very tough lockdown regime very early. We're currently down to 630 cases in the country. They're all contained except for 4. We don't know where they came from. We nail those 4 and we have COVID licked. That's how close we are. So we're excited right now, but we are still on very, very tough lockdown. One of the most extreme in the world.
So what's that for you and the winery, and how are the team coping with harvest happening during lockdown?
I'm not allowed to go to the winery. I'm over 70. I'm not allowed to go to the winery. So my 20th vintage, and I can't see it, but that's the rules. Our pickers are split into separate bubbles. We have 3 bubbles of pickers. They're never allowed to meet each other or to interact with each other. We have a separate winery bubble that's not allowed to interact with anyone who harvests. And so everybody is working their little discrete universes and getting on with their own jobs without interacting with each other, which can be surreal at times. If I want to drop some treats for the pickers, I have to go to a neutral territory, dump things, move away, then on my mobile phone say there's no one there, and they can go in and pick them up, having first of all sanitized them.
And Nigel, you told me that there are many winemaking people in Otago who are married to each other who are also making wine in different wineries. And is it right that some of those people, because they have to be isolated from the whole winery team, has to remain isolated from anyone who could bring it in, they can't actually stay in the same house together?
No, that's right. We've got people living in our winery because they can't live at home with their wife or husband. So they're camping out at the winery because different bubbles. You cannot interact across a bubble. And so, for 6-7 weeks, you've got separate lives. Then you throw kids into that equation. The whole thing gets really quite challenging. But the upside of that, as I say, 4 cases now that we don't know where they came from. We nail those 4, and we'll be the first country in the world to actually contain it. So,
well, I think we've all got leader envy at the moment, because leaders in the rest of the world are pretty bloody useless. But I think Jacinda is doing a damn good job, and everyone seems to admire very much how she's handled it.
Yeah, we're pretty proud of her.
Can you just give us a little snapshot of how the harvest is looking this year?
It's very tough. It's the coldest year we've seen for about 15 years. What makes it tough is we're having to be very slow with picking. We're having to wait on each individual block to get to suitable ripeness. And when you've got all the pickers living in tents without proper food, sometimes without proper washing facilities, effectively in little refugee camps around the vineyards, it's very, very hard on them. They've been utterly amazing in sticking with it. Admittedly, they had nowhere to go. They're locked in, so we do have a captive team. But we've been having, apart from paying them, we're supplying them with bonuses, and we're having now to try and figure out where do they go when they finish picking? How do they move? Are they allowed to go work somewhere else? How are they going to get out of the country back to where they came from? All of these things. Well, we may have to keep these people for weeks or even months until there's a route out of it for them. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but it's working. We think we're going to be in by Saturday.
Great.
And I can tell you, the sigh of relief that'll happen if we've actually got the fruit in by the end of this week will be huge.
Great. Well, Nigel, thank you. And for everyone who joined a little late, Nigel runs Felton Road, which is one of the best perceived wineries in New Zealand. The wines are fantastic. Also, I think incredibly good value. Pinot Noir and Chardonnay particularly. Some very good Riesling too. But if you want to spend 40 to 60 pounds on a bottle of Pinot Noir, you can get a pretty ordinary Burgundy for that sort of price. I mean, it seems like a lot of money, but the Burgundy doesn't buy you much in Burgundy. But for a bottle of Felton Road, I think they started around 30 in the UK and go up to the top wines, 50 something. Extremely good wines. One of the few wines I regularly buy myself for my own cellar, and I'm a bit mean and I've got a lot of wine of my own to drink, but I do buy Felton Road. So I would say do look out for Felton Road if you're in a restaurant or in a wine shop and you see a bottle of Felton Road. Really deliciously good Pinots and Chardonnays. And
what's a restaurant, Justin?
We do also drink a lot of Domaine Jones. Nigel, I was going to ask you.
A restaurant? I haven't heard of one of those.
Well, no, they don't exist anymore. It was something of the last year restaurants, I'm afraid. I was going to ask you about what's the vintage you're selling at the moment, Nigel, because the 19s is about to be released. No, they're in the cellar, aren't they? But which ones are you actually selling at the moment?
18s are released, but pretty much all disappeared. 19s will be released, we think, in July. We're actually having a few requests from our distributors around the world saying, can you release earlier? Because they're feeling cash flow, and we're good for cash flow because the wine sells through very fast.
And Nigel has a very clever philosophy, which is to split his limited number of cases among a lot of different customers who all have a lot of customers clamoring for it. So when it arrives, it tends to be sold pretty quickly. And you don't see it around very much because it sells through in a week or two, merchants selling to their private clients, and then it's all gone and doesn't appear on the shelf. So I do say, if you see Felton Road for sale, buy some.
I think I'm glad you pointed out reasonably priced. I know that's expensive for wine, but for the kind of biodynamic Pinot we're making, it isn't. And we've not put our price up now other than inflation for 15 years, unlike Burgundy. And I think that puts us in a very stable situation.
Could you just share for us in a couple of minutes the kind of major reasons that you are biodynamic and some of the things that you do at Felton Road that are perhaps a little different from the way other people do it?
Yeah, by all means. We started with organics 20 years ago. Organic was a no-brainer. The day I started, the first thing that Blair said to me is, can we go organic? And the first thing I said to him was, well, that was my first question for you. So we knew we wanted to do that. I was concerned with organics because organics to me was a list of things I'm not allowed to do. And I had worked previously in the car industry where people were obsessed with the concept of zero defects as opposed to really injecting quality into things. And I thought zero defects was a way by which you can make perfect rubbish. And there was nothing in the regime that said, this is how you make it better. And although I thought biodynamics had a lot of crackpot stuff in it that I wasn't very keen on, it was at least a genuine attempt to say, how do we make it better, as opposed to how do we take out the bad stuff. So that was our starting point. And I think we learned very quickly, it is a different approach in the way you think about things. My friend who you know, Nick Mills, here in Wanaka, talks about it's learning to negotiate with the land. You effectively have to say, look, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to put 20,000 vines here, and I know you're not going to like it, but what can I do to make it up to you? And so biodynamics is trying to look at it at a holistic level, at a land level, and say, you know, how do we make the land richer? How do we make the land more populous? We don't, as a culture, biodynamics doesn't fight disease by trying to kill the disease. It fights disease by trying to fill the ecosystem the disease is trying to live in. So the more full and the more alive your ecosystem is, the less the opportunity there is for disease to happen. So I like these ideas. The Harry Potter stuff, you know, stags, bladders and cow horns, I can leave that out. Doesn't bother me. We do it. There's not much on TV. It amuses the guys in the vineyard. That's fine. But I believe absolutely it is about learning the rhythms of your ecosystem and learning more about your ecosystem and how it works. And it's absolutely about trying to understand what goes on in the soil. You know, James Milton in New Zealand, and James always says, tread lightly, you're not walking on the dirt, you're stepping on the roof of another kingdom. And, you know, that's something that we understand very clearly. There's more microbes in a teaspoon of organic soil than there are people on the planet. And we're trying to understand those soil populations, we think is critical. We don't understand them very well yet, but we do know that if you're going to stick fungicides and pesticides into soil that has billions of creatures living in every teaspoon, you're going to create mayhem.
Nigel, another thing that James Milton said, which I think is very memorable, is it's difficult to be green if you're in the red. And that does highlight the, you know, if you're willfully incurring much higher costs and having lower yields as a result, it's very difficult to make that commitment unless you're very eccentric and independently wealthy, or you can really persuade your customers to pay more for your wine. Do you think it's important as part of the Felton Road image that you are not only organic but actually also biodynamic, and has that been an important way of you marketing yourself around the world?
We've never really talked about it very much. People who know us know that we are, but we've never put it on the label. We are certified, but we don't put it on the label because we do it as part of our search as to how to do things better. But it's interesting, the benefits aren't necessarily where you think they'll be. We have, our viticulture team is about 20 people, which is an awful lot for 32 hectares of vines. So yes, it would be expensive by any stretch of the imagination, but that's mainly because it's all hand viticulture.
Basically looking at Jean-Marc, going, well, how many people per hectare is that? Yes, that's expensive.
Yes, it is. But what's interesting is half of those people are part of our biodynamic internship program. We have about 300 applications a year for 10 places. They're all graduate viticulturists or graduate winemakers from around the world. They come in to spend a season learning biodynamic farming before they go home to their domain, wherever it might be around the world. We've got now 300 people who've been through that program, and every one of them sells our wine for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, this is not your secret weapon, is all of these ambassadors you create by inviting them to come and work with you for 6 months. And then... We have
a sales force of 300 people worldwide.
Well, Nigel, thank you so much. I'm just conscious of time, and we are supposedly finishing at 7:30. We might go on a little bit longer, but we do need to talk to Nick. And actually, funnily enough, I have a question from Adrian Atkinson, Nick, who says that he's just over the hill from you, and he wants to know where you get your horns from. So perhaps in a minute, Nick, you can tell us a little bit about what you're up to, and let's just say thank you to Nigel for that really, really interesting and insightful bit about how things are going at Felton Road. Really enjoyed that.
It's a pleasure. And can I just say, I once heard someone at a biodynamic conference ask the question, where do you get cow horns from? And the presenter looked up and said, cows.
Yes. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Nick, we're going to ask you to just tell us a little bit about Albury, about why you're growing grapes there, what your plan was, and why you wanted to be biodynamic, and where do you get your horns from? So could you enlighten us, Nick?
Where's Nick?
Nick may be on mute still. Let's just have a look. I can't see Nick. There's so many people here. We're trying to find Nick and unmuting him. Where are you, Nick? Has he dropped off the call?
Oh, Nick? Is that Nicholas?
That's Nicholas, no. I think he might have dropped off. Hang on, here he comes. I've had to admit him back into the room.
Oh,
Hi.
Nick, hello.
He's on the phone to me. Says he's been kicked out.
Right, Nick, sorry. We've just put you back in. We just noticed you were out.
Okay.
You should be back in now. Thanks, Stephen. Otherwise, you could relay the whole thing through your phone if you like. Nick, are you with us and can you hear us?
Where is he? On page 2.
Oh, he's muted still. I'm going to unmute him. Nick, sorry you dropped out there. We've got you back now.
Did I miss my slot?
You didn't miss your slot. You're here and we want to hear from you. But we did have a question for you which you might not have heard, which is Adrian Atkinson says, he lives just over the hill from you. Where do you get your horns from?
Well, we get them from the Biodynamic Association.
Okay, well, look, what I'm going to ask you to do, if you could just tell us a little bit about why you started growing grapes in England, for starters, and then why did you decide to do it biodynamically? And can you just tell us a little bit about how it is being biodynamic in England?
Okay, well, it's quite a long story, but I'll keep it short. I'd always dreamt of having a vineyard. I was in the IT industry and I was lucky enough to retire early, and then met Mr. Skelton, who was on this call, and he convinced me of 2 things. One was that you could grow grapes that made great wine in the UK, and the second was that it was commercially viable. Well, he was right about the first. I'm not sure about the second.
He would also tell you, I think, that you'd be crazy to go organic. If I know
did everything possible. Well, at the time, it was just organic, not biodynamic. He did everything he could to try and persuade me not to do that, which made me all the more determined to do it.
You paid him a lot of money as a consultant and then didn't listen to him, which is
exactly right. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, we went round to look at a number of vineyards in the UK, and I think it was Will Davenport, who's been, one of the pioneers of organic viticulture in the UK, convinced me that it was viable and a good thing to do. So yeah, we went organic initially, and then moved to being biodynamic a couple of years later. And I think that probably was kicked off by a visit to see Jody Scheckter at Laverstoke Park. You might remember Jody from Formula One fame years ago. Mm-hmm. And he has a 2,000-acre biodynamic farm in Laverstoke. And I went to a seminar held by Dr. Elaine Ingham, who's sort of a leading light in the soil food web. And that was the start of my conversion into biodynamics. But the other reason is that we quite like dancing naked in the vineyard at midnight.
I have a feeling you've used that line before.
There's not very many of us in the UK. There's, many of you might not know that the UK is, now become one of the, I would say, in quality, leading regions of the world in terms of quality sparkling wine. Most of it's still sold in the UK, but increasingly it's being exported, particularly to the States, not much in France. The reason it works well in the UK, of course, is that we're a cool climate, and obviously you make sparkling wine from fairly acidic grape juice, so that works quite well over here. There are 600-700 vineyards in the UK, but around about 20 probably are certified organic. And Stephen may correct me, but I don't think there's probably more than 6 or 7 or 8 who do it that seriously. And when it comes to biodynamics, there's probably only 3 or 4 of us who are mad enough to go down that track. But I have no regrets. For us, it is hard in the UK because of our damp, wet climate, and obviously we don't have any systemic chemicals to tackle the mildews and botrytis. And it does mean that we have to farm it more intensively in terms of labour. I reckon it costs us 40% plus more to manage the vineyard.
And how many
And
hectares?
I don't know about, sorry?
How many hectares do you have?
We have 5 hectares. We are looking at planting another 4, but this little lockdown has probably delayed that a year, I guess. So we have 4 hectares. We produce 25,000 bottles a year from that. So the yields are quite low in the UK. But for us, when we did our original business plan, so don't forget I was new to all of this, we planted in 2009. When we did our original business plan, I think it was about a 13-year return on investment. In truth, I now say it's generational. Luckily, my daughter is fully involved in the business, and one day she might reap some reward. But we did make a profit last year for the first time, and we were budgeted to make a reasonable profit this year as well. Obviously, the COVID problems will scupper that, most of that. But I would say for us, the reason our size of vineyard is able to make money is mainly because of the visitor experience. We sell probably 35% of our business wine directly to the public. And we normally would do lots of tours and tastings. We have lots of events at the vineyard. We have biodynamic events at the vineyard. We have a big wine club that will help us to dig up our cow horns and various other things. So there's a lot of experiences, I suppose, that we wrap around the wine.
Well, Nick, I'm going to jump in here. We, as you know, have our own wine club, and obviously our name is Domaine of the Bee. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in that you do is you have a lot of bee hives on your property, and you also run days of bee keeping experience days. And it was my plan this year to join in one of your beekeeping days and maybe to bring a bunch of our wine club members to come down. That's obviously been slightly scuppered by the movement restrictions, but I do hope that towards the end of the year or next year, we'll be able to join in one of your days. And I hope that a lot of you guys listening would be interested to come and learn a little bit about beekeeping. Why do you do that? And is it important to the biodynamic side of your business?
Well, bees are very much encouraged. I mean, I think, as you probably know, the bees don't actually fertilise the grapes. You know, they do that themselves. But in terms of biodiversity, actually, they're very important. Viticulture and agriculture to a large extent. So the more you can encourage the biodiversity in and around the vineyard, then that's great. So biodynamically, bees are encouraged, and we have probably, when they're at their peak, about 500,000 bees, I suppose. And the bee club, I have to point out, I'm not a sort of an expert beekeeper by any stretch of the imagination. We have one of our wine club members, it turned out, and he looks after the bees on our vineyard. And we have a bee club and a queen bee club as well, which gives you extra experiences. And we have quite a number of people who buy those experiences, and which involves looking up, various experiences, understanding beekeeping, dressing up in the suits, looking at the hives a number of times a year, and then having a nice glass of our wine afterwards. So it sort of works well with the whole ethos that we have.
Well, we have one of your fans on our call who are chipping in and saying how great your wines are, and how Redmond did a beekeeping event for Jane's Father's Day treat, which apparently was wonderful. So, Nick, I mean, can we book ourselves in for next year and come en masse in a group and learn?
Absolutely, we'd love to organise that. Love to see you.
Surrey Hills are very visitable from London. It's one of my contentions that wine tourism is going to become so much bigger for English wineries than it is at the moment. We have a city of 10 or 12 million people very close to a lot of the wine regions, and it makes no sense at all not to pop out to Surrey Hills in an open-top sports car on a sunny May afternoon and visit some English wineries. So count us in.
Well, I think the southwest of London, especially, is identified as a huge opportunity for English sparkling wines, and we're increasingly seeing lots of people make that trip out to the vineyard. Quite a lot of groups of young people, actually, I would say in their 30s, late 20s, 30s, who have seen us on Instagram, and that's something else that we do quite a lot of. We're quite. Luckily, my daughter, I don't really do much of that myself, but luckily my daughter's big into social media, and we get a lot of visitors and followers through Instagram and not so much Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, I suppose, in terms of the consumer, are the big social media areas for us.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you. I'm going to do a brief advertisement for Albury Vineyards. Do go and look them up. Do follow them on social media. And I haven't been yet, Nick, so I'm going to come down. And you're also near a gin producer. Silent Pool are very close to you, aren't they?
They're our neighbours next door. In fact, we've become a little visitor attraction now because we got the Silent Pool distillery right next door. And they make a vermouth for us, and also brandy and a spirit as well.
Yeah, you had me on the gin, Nick. So
I've got you on the gin. I don't need to sell you there.
Be down very, very soon.
I've been drinking an Albury cocktail, which is our vermouth with some sparkling wine.
Well, I look forward to trying it. And I've already talked a little about Nigel and Nigel's wines. I just also want to mention that Katie has a case of wine that is available for sale at the moment at £10 a bottle. I think it's £120 for a 12-bottle case. And it's called Seeing You Through. And what I will aim to do for everyone we've got on the call, we don't have an easy way to immediately communicate with you all, but I think we've written down who you all are or taken photographs of the screenshot. And we will do an email just to give you links to all of those places so that if you want to buy Katie's wine, she also does quite regular Zoom calls with John Mark, and we'll be very delighted to have any of you who are interested joining in and signing up. I can also see James Kinglake sitting there in the background. James is another organic grower in the south of France. James, wave at us. Do you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about, you're stuck in England, aren't you? Like me, you can't get out to France.
I am stuck in England. And this is some sort of backdrop that I've got off my computer.
It's not a view of the Pennines, is it, James? I don't think. No.
Yeah, I'm stuck in the UK. I have a small vineyard in the Limoux region, not a million miles away from Katie. We've been certified organic since 2010. And I would wholeheartedly support anybody that says you do it for non-financial reasons. Certainly our yields, I mean, the last 2 or 3 years have been an absolute shocker for us. One of those could have been prevented if we had been conventional rather than organic, because we suffered horrendous yield losses due to mildew 2 years ago. And we could have prevented that. There is no question. And a lot of people in the south of France, either legally or illegally, went and bought conventional products rather than just using copper and copper sulfate, what have you. So they got around the problem. Some gave up their organic certification, some didn't, suffice it to say. So I think on average, we worked out that our yields are down about 30-35% post conversion. The last 3 years, they've been down a lot more than that. So, and in terms of, do you get more money for it? No. There are certain countries now, you mentioned Scandinavia, I totally agree with that. Certain countries, unless you're certified organic, they're not interested in your wines. Unless you've got an amazing little niche product. I mean, you know, Justin, I know you sell a bit of wine up in Scandinavia, fantastic product. But, you know, run-of-the-mill stuff is difficult to get into a lot of countries out there without being organic now.
Great. Well, look, that was really interesting. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions, and if anyone wants to ask a question, we will run a little bit over 7:30 if people are interested in staying on. I do just want to say thank you to everybody who has participated, all of you for calling in, but especially to Katie, to Nigel, and to Nick for, I think, giving some really interesting little insights into their worlds and what's going on and how they go about things. And if you want to leave at this point, you know, the official call is kind of coming to an end, but we'll chat on for a little bit longer to try and answer a few of the questions. If you want to stay around for 10 more minutes. But thanks very much indeed for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the session. If you want to unmute yourselves at this point, we could have a free-for-all on the questions. And I wonder if
there was one about how thorough is the organic audit.
Yeah, so Mary and Josh wanted to know when, this may be one for Katie if you're still with us, Katie, when the auditors come, what do they do? Do they really look at everything, or do they just sort of tick the boxes and then head off happy?
No, I can get Jean-Marc because he actually did the audits, but they look at everything. It's not just an easy, okay, yeah, let's or tell us what you're doing. They need to look at everything and check it off their checklists. The French love administration, they love paperwork, and they don't go home until they've ticked every single box. I just asked the same question, if I may, to Jean-Marc. Est-ce que les audits, quelqu'un a demandé si les audits c'est facile ou si c'est vraiment rigoureux en France?
Disons que c'est quand même pas facile d'acheter des produits quand on est en bio, parce qu'il y a des certificats, des choses. Donc il y a les comptabilités, donc c'est quand même difficile d'acheter des produits qui ne sont pas bio quand on est en bio. Et les contrôles, c'est difficile, voilà, c'est pas facile de passer à côté. Sur des petites quantités, ça doit être faisable, mais
les audits, là, les contrôles, quand ils viennent contrôler, c'est sévère ou pas sévère?
Si, non, c'est sérieux, je pense.
Yeah, I think so.
No, yes, I think it's difficult de tricher.
You can't cheat.
Yeah. Okay.
From a Frenchman.
So as well as being more expensive, potentially giving you lower yields, having no extra price benefit, really, it's also a total pain in the arse. So you're really convincing me. Thank you. I'm still interested in doing it, so maybe one of these days. Beverly had a question for Nigel. Nigel, if you're still with us, she particularly wanted to know if you thought that Pinot Noir, specifically as a grape, was more needing of organic and biodynamic practices than perhaps some other grapes. Is it more expressive, more delicate, and benefits more from those practices?
I think it's one of the easiest to do organically because we get the price for the bottles. It's as simple as that. If I was making Grenache, it would be a much, much tougher decision to make. So yeah, Pinot, you can afford it in some ways. Pinot's a wine of place. And so, you know, we've always said we don't do it to make the wine better. But if you want a wine to taste of a place, then you don't screw the place up. You know, it's as simple as that. A lot of the land that we farm, it's very, very unusual as a place because we're in quite a remote part of a new country. We're the first human beings who've ever farmed that land. It was literally virgin when we took it. Now, you wouldn't want to be the first person to mess it up. So that opportunity to take completely virgin land and then farm it without putting anything nasty on it is good. And can I just ask, why do we have to pay to be organic or biodynamic and not do stuff, as opposed to the people who are using the chemicals having to pay to certify what they do?
Good question. I don't know. Actually, we have a related question to Katie, which is, if you had all the money in the world, would you be going biodynamic at this stage? Do you feel the draw to it, even if economically it doesn't make sense?
Si on avait de l'argent, est-ce qu'on ferait du biodynamique? Si on avait tout l'argent dans le monde.
Pour le moment, on a essayé des... Yes, we try a little. We try to use any plant around the vineyard. When I spray, I can't do all the time, but I look just before the full moon for use sulfur. I try to do a little, but I don't have time to organize all, to do all like this, and I wait for the moment.
No, we're waiting for the money, so I think the answer is yes.
We had a question from Stephen Skelton earlier, which I'm not sure who it's directed to, Stephen.
It's Katie.
So the question was, are you making any money? It actually, I think he addressed it not to the whole audience, but to me as the host. We
can answer that if you like. I mean, we have to make money. We have to make money every year to keep going. It's our livelihood. This is a rural area, a very poor area that I've come into and married one of the farmers who was previously in the cooperative. And together we decided to make well, it wasn't it work to make money, but to make a living. It's a living. It's not making money. It's actually sustaining us so that we can live. So it may be a little bit different. And it's interesting, the question, if you were millionaires, would you do biodynamic? Yeah, we definitely would, but we're not in that position. We are doing it because we need to make a living rather than a lifestyle. Well, both. It goes hand in hand, really. But.
Justin, can I just make one comment on the organic and biodynamic? And this may be UK specific, but for us, the real cost is being organic. It's not that much more costly being biodynamic over and above organic in the UK.
Oh, that's interesting.
So we make our own composts. We have certainly some additional sprays that we have to do, but we don't find it hugely more expensive over and above being organic. It's more restrictive, of course.
Yeah, and do you find it more time consuming though? Because just on the two things you just mentioned, for us, it was just the thought of having to go and make your own concoctions, and it's time.
Well, we do buy a number of them from the Biodynamic Association in the UK.
Ah, okay. Ah.
So that's, we do bury our own cow horns. We use our own cow muck. Equisetum, for example, which we spray 2 days before a full moon at Easter to try and help with the frosts. We have in the past bought that, but we make our own now. But you can buy some of it fairly inexpensively in the UK.
Okay. That's really interesting. So the big step for you was like
definitely
organic, and the next step is less.
And the additional. I mean, again, it's been interesting for me that I don't think we've suffered from mildews or botrytis any more than conventional in the UK. But what we do have to do is more sprays. So we're spraying probably 20 times in the season.
Wow.
As opposed to which is a lot.
And can we just ask a question? I think it's the same one coming at the same time. You've got 5 hectares. How many people do you have to look after those 5 hectares? Just in the vineyards, not in the winery, but just looking after the vineyards.
Well, for us, we've got another 4 hectares, which is not organic as well, on another vineyard, which we're managing sustainably, because that's a relatively short-term thing for us. And I have a vineyard manager, an assistant vineyard manager, and then we're very heavily reliant on seasonal labour in the UK. So, we'll get in teams of Romanians, 5, 10, 15 at a time to do a particular job.
Okay.
But that's it. And I used to do a fair bit of work on the vineyard, but I'm more tied up with the marketing side of things now.
Yeah, I take lots of photos too.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you. I think we probably have come to the end. Certainly our bottle is now empty, so I imagine some of yours are too, and you need to go and refresh. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining in, and there's still 30 of you right now, and particular thanks to Nigel for waking up at 5:30 in the morning to join us. So round of applause to him, and to Jacinda and New Zealand generally for being awesome.
I want to know what Beverly's cooking.
Beverly, what are you cooking? She's off mic. She's off mic. Well, I think anyway, let's say thank you.
Just one. Sorry to interrupt. One last time. It's unfortunately a root day today. Could you choose a flower or a fruit day next time when the wines will taste a bit nicer?
Well, funny you should say that. Someone else sent me a link to the biodynamic calendar who said it was a flower day. So
no, it's a root day today, I'm afraid.
Well, yes, I don't believe in that. I have to say, I believe in a lot of great wine is made biodynamically, but I do not believe in the calendar, which I think is a feral nonsense. We tested it when I was at Waitrose, and there was absolutely zero correlation. Anyway, what was that, Beverly?
My theory is it works for some people because everybody's different.
Well, that is maybe also possibly true, but the theory is, everybody, you have fruit days, flower days, root days, and leaf days. And on each of those days, different categories of wine taste different and maybe better or worse. Some days you should completely avoid tasting certain wines. Other days you should focus on. Now, we tested that in the Waitrose tasting room. We stuck a big chart on the wall. We covered up which day it was. We said, rate the wines you normally taste, rate how good they taste, and let's see if there's a correlation that on fruit days, these wines taste better. And after 6 months, and not a huge amount of data, let's say we didn't do it every day, there was zero correlation, and we weren't convinced. So we stopped planning our tastings on flower and fruit days, which are the better days, I think, and decided to ignore it. It's all based on German horticulture in the 20s, and to my mind, I think it's not a very good argument for biodynamics. Nigel, do you have a contrary view?
No, we don't think it makes any difference. We've tried it.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop me drinking wine every day.
No, drink wine every day. That is probably the plan.
We do have crap days occasionally, but that's something else.
Look, we're going to sign off now. Thank you so much. It's 20 minutes past our official time. Everyone would like to raise a glass and just say thank you to our presenters.
Muted.
We've unmuted almost all of you, so say
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
See you again. Do another one of these in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Arrivederci.
Au revoir.
Auf Wiedersehen.
À bientôt.
Thank you. Take care, Domaine.
À la prochaine.
Prochaine.
Yutaha.
Ciao, ciao tutti.
Ciao a tutti.